Hello, this is Elliot Vella's video logs, episode 10. The title's called Satan Controls the World, Enoch's Visions. So, first up, I just want to talk about Genesis, the first book of the Bible. And yeah, when God is, talking about in the beginning, he is creating the world, and creating the seas, and the mountains and the earth, and with his spirit. I used to always think that this is the start. This is the start of our existence as humans. And God created the heavens, and then He created the earth. But I have found out since I've been saved that when it says that in Genesis, God has, this is a recreation of the earth when He is talking about him creating the earth in Genesis. And there's a history to Genesis and before Genesis, and I want to explain a little bit about that. So in the heavens, you probably heard of Satan. If you haven't, his name's Satan, but he used to be called Lucifer. Lucifer was one of God's, mighty angels. And he was up there with all the other heavenly beings, and he pretty much got full of himself, and he got overtaken with pride. He wanted his own worship. He wanted, he wanted to be a god as well. And he was one of God's prized possessions. At the start, it was, there's different levels of angels, and he was one of the top levels of angels, mighty, powerful angel. And anyway, then there was, God tried to sort of turn him around, and he didn't listen, and he was patient with him, and then he sort of persuaded a bunch of other angels in heaven to follow him, and that they could have their own power, and their own government, and meanwhile also God gives angels different, dominions of areas and stuff to govern, and Lucifer's, dominion to govern was the earth. They were spiritual beings, but the earth, spiritual beings could still live on the earth. It was just in a different realm that humans, couldn't see, and so he wanted to govern, he wanted to do that for himself. He wanted his own power, and pride got to him, overtook him. Then there was, a war sort of broke out in heaven. Michael, the archangel, a smaller, less powerful angel than Lucifer, stood up and said, this isn't right, we worship God, we're servants of God, and and took a stand for God. And so there was a war. There was a war in heaven. At the same time, there was a war on the earth. And that war, of course, God's always going to win that war. And anyone who stands for God. And so, the war happened. Lucifer lost the war in heaven. Michael and all the other angels who fought, won. And so Satan and then all the angels that followed him were cast out of heaven and onto the earth. And so then he was cast down to the earth. Lucifer, his name pretty much turns into Satan, and all these, fallen angels, they turn into demons. Then the earth is destroyed. The earth is, it's had a war on it. So in Genesis, when God's talking about him forming the earth, this is after it had already had a war on it. And so that's why, so then he creates the earth, he creates Adam and Eve, and then the serpent, who is Satan, who is Lucifer, talks to Adam, convinces him to eat from the tree of good and evil. And so you can understand then that Satan has been cast out of heaven, and he's just trying to get people to turn. He despises humans. He despises humans as well, because God tells the angels that one day, because pride got the best of some of the angels, like Lucifer and all these demons, that then he creates humans pretty much as a slap in the face to Satan. And he says, he tells, Lucifer and stuff when they're in heaven that out of dust, I'll create these beings, and they'll be, weak compared to these divine angels. But through humility instead of pride, these human beings, if they live out their life and they, through humility and through their brokenness, they will depend on, their connection with God and Jesus, and they will then, if they follow that path, they will actually be raised above angels. And Lucifer doesn't like that, so he's always hated, humans, because in the long run, if we follow Christ and we listen to Christ and his ways and his new covenant, then we will raise up and we will, we will take Satan's place in heaven and then eventually on earth. So Satan's whole thing is to try and deceive humans so they don't get there. And anyone who follows Satan, is going to end up in the lake of fire in hell. So that's a bit of a gist of, Genesis, and that, God is, talking about a recreation of the earth in Genesis, after it's already had this war on it. And then he created humans, not only as a slap in the face to Satan, but also because, he loves them. And, life on earth, there's a war going on. And in the spirit realm. And you're either on Satan's side or God's side. If you're drifting around, you haven't made a choice, then you're with Satan. if you have searched out God and, you know, you've connected with him and prayed and, you know, you're under the blood of Christ, then, you know, you're for the kingdom. You're for the kingdom of God and you're on God's side. So that's a bit of a gist of Genesis. That's a bit of a gist of who Satan is. How is he controlling the world? Well, Satan still has dominion really over the world. Yes, there's angels. Yes, there's God. You know, in the long run, God's really in control. You know, God is the creator. He can see the end from the beginning. He knows the future. He knows what paths, you know, we will take. He knows people that will choose him. And so he actually chooses them first. You know, he knows his children. He knows, you know, who is written in the book of life, like I've talked about in previous episodes. So God, you know, ultimately is in control. And like I've also talked about, you know, Jesus, he's king now in heaven and he's coming back, you know, to display his wrath, you know, on anyone who doesn't follow God, in the long run, doesn't choose God. And, you know, there will be the rapture, which is when all God's children, you know, will get, you know, lifted up to heaven. And then there will be the, you know, the great tribulation, which is a period of time on earth that there will be a lot of suffering, and it'll pretty much be like the apocalypse. And then, you know, there will still be a chance for people to choose God then. But you don't want to be around in that time, you know, and that's going to be a pretty horrible time. And if you read Revelation, and maybe I'll make another video about, you know, explaining Revelation more, but you want to be saved before that, so that when Jesus comes, you know, you get raptured out, you know, and you're away from that whole, you know, tribulation time, apocalypse time, because it's not going to be a nice time to be on the earth. So how is Satan controlling the world now? Well, you know, even in the Bible, if you look at when, you know, Jesus, you know, Jesus lives a humble human life, and he doesn't really have awareness of, you know, who he is until he gets baptized by John the Baptist. So when he was, I think, 33. Once that happens, he has awareness of he's actually God. He's God's son as well. And he goes into the wilderness for 40 days. And Satan tempts Jesus, and he offers him all the kingdoms of the world. Satan controls the world. You look at the early history of the Bible, even though God's in, you know, actual full control, Satan at the moment, he is controlling all the governments. You know, he's controlling the media. He's controlling, you know, pretty much everything besides, you know, Christians that are going against it. And, you know, he's a deceptive, you know, serpent type, you know, spiritual being. He wants to confuse people. That's why a lot of religions as well, you know, if they're not all about, you know, Jesus Christ as a king, they're just another way to fool people, so they won't be saved, and so they'll go into the lake of fire with him, and they're not covered, you know, under the blood. So Satan's controlling the world pretty much by deceiving people, and you can see it, you know. I used to be a graphic designer, and a lot of that, is there's a small aspect that is about design and and there's cool things about it, um, about logo types and and branding and stuff like that. But the whole gist behind it, it's just about persuading people, manipulating people, to buy things. And you know, the whole, if you look into the history behind even Egypt, there's a couple movies and documentaries about it and stuff like that. And it's all about, um, these old, these old forms of like manipulation and spells and witchcraft and stuff like that. So there's a lot of deceit out there, even archaeology and stuff like that. If you've even watched Ancient Apocalypse and stuff like that, you can see that archaeologists, there's a lot of deception behind it all. And there's a lot of lying that goes on in the world. You can see it by so many, behind so many things, and it just shows that Satan really is controlling, the world. Even mainstream media, it's like it's all got deceptive things to make you buy things, and there's just so much deception, and once you sort of learn all this stuff, it makes sense, you see it, and even how I was raised, as a Jehovah's Witness, even though that's a false religion, it's not, it's not saying that Jesus is, is God and the King. Another way of, deceptive, manipulating people so they're not saved. But, there's bits in that I learned, that Satan was controlling the world and stuff. And so that always stuck with me, and you could see it, and I was always on a search, my time since I was, once I left it, when she was about 16 or so, till about a year and a few months ago, and just like, I was always interested in UFOs and, watching. There's so much, there's a whole world of that stuff, that you can go search and watch, and of YouTube and Giants and stuff like that, and all the stuff that goes on in Antarctica. And then when you find out about all this stuff, like, it makes sense, and that stuff is real. But I'll go into that a bit more later in this episode. So we've explained who Satan is, how he's controlling the world, who is Enoch, and what are his visions. So there's the book of Enoch. You can actually pick that up just on Amazon or something. In some of the older Bibles, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the book of Enoch is in it. Also, like the Ethiopian Bible, the book of Enoch is in that as well. But it's got some controversial things that old biblical scholars didn't want in there. And so the book of Enoch, was taken out of, a lot of the mainstream Bibles that we have. But it's super important part of the Bible. And, the King James talks about Enoch, how he was taken. There's only two people that were taken from earth and didn't die, and that was Elijah and Enoch, and which is pretty wild. Two people that never actually saw death, and God just took them and they went to heaven. So in the book of Enoch, he talks about another sort of rebellion that happened in heaven. And so there was, talks about the Watchers. And the Watchers were another set of angels that were meant to govern the earth and watch over the earth, and that was like their task and their duty. And but these watchers, watching over the earth in early days, of the earth and creation, and they saw beautiful women, and they decided that they wanted to leave their heavenly duties and go and make wives for themselves with these women. And so the leader of these watchers, I think there was about 200 watchers or so, and this is all written in the book of Enoch. The leader of them didn't want to get, he thought some of the watchers, these angels, would pull out of their plan, and so they all made a pact together on a mountain that they sort of cursed themselves, and they all made a pact together that no one's allowed to leave this decision that they made, and they sort of put a curse on themselves in a way. And so they left their divine order, and then they found wives for themselves on earth, and they were these spiritual beings, and they found wives for themselves, and they pretty much corrupted creation, and that was the beginning of corruption to creation. And sort of Ancient Apocalypse, that TV series sort of explains parts of it in a way, and even I've traveled around the world a little bit, and the more history that you learn about the world, there's all these old civilizations, and they have similar stories about these gods, and they called them gods, and they were, these beings with powers and stuff like that. And it's all around the world and earth, and you can sort of, you start researching it, you find out every sort of different civilization has these stories of different gods and stuff. And they weren't gods, they were fallen angels, they were the watchers, this pack of 200, and they taught humans spells, they taught all these women spells and witchcraft, they taught men how to make swords, and they pretty much corrupted the earth. And there's more things that they taught people, but they they taught people magic, and they with this this knowledge, this was sort of divine knowledge that wasn't meant for humans, and they bring that and they corrupted, and they and that's why then all these wars came out in in our human civilization, with swords and bloodshed, and then all these witches and witchcraft, and then they also when they met these human wives, they had babies with them, they had sex with them and had babies, and their babies, is a mix of fallen angel or watcher with a human. They created these giants, and their babies are called the Nephilim, and they were born, and then they would grow into these massive giants. So another way of humankind being corrupted. And these giants, they grew massive. You can research it. There's history of giants all over the world, and these giants, some grew up, and they treated like kings and stuff. And a lot of the early parts of the Bible as well, they talk about them. But the book of Enoch sort of goes into more description as well. And this Nephilim, they were very destructive, and some of them were kings, some of them were just super destructive, some, you know, there was different sizes and shapes and stuff, and they became so destructive. They would, you know, they would eat everything on land, and then, you know, and then eat humans. They would eat a lot of humans, and then they would even eat each other, you know, fight and eat each other. And so all this corruption came from these watchers. And so the archangels, you know, they heard humankind, and God heard humankind crying out, you know, and just like in pain and agony from all this destruction that happened. And so, you know, the whole judgment on Satan, and the fallen angels, that is waiting, you know, divine judgment. And that whole divine judgment will happen, you know, at the end when Jesus comes back. But these watchers, they got judgment, you know, you know, earlier. They already got some judgment. And so after a while, divine judgment came down, and is pretty much the start of Noah. And if you know the story of Noah, you know, God got Noah to build an ark. There was so much corruption in the world, and that, you know, for like 100 or so years, he told people that there's a flood coming, and they laughed at him, and they went about their lives, marrying, you know, having parties, living their lives normally, and they all laughed at him. And, you know, and as he built an ark with his family, he still told them, you know, he tried to save people, no one listened. And then, you know, this was divine judgment. And then it happened, you know, it started raining, and God closed, you know, and he got, you know, 2 of every animal, and into the ark, every kind as well. So there's more, you know, we can go into all of that in another episode one day, if, you know, if that's what happens. But the, you know, and all civilization, you know, all the animals went into the ark. He closed the doors, God closed the doors, and then the rest of civilization, you know, got destroyed by, you know, God opening up, you know, the crust of the seas, and, you know, and it just opening up, you know, it was like an earthquake, it was like tsunamis and stuff, and just filled the earth with, you know, water, and then it also rained for 40 days, 40 nights, and that was part of the judgment. Also, so a lot of the giants, all the giants got destroyed. Their spirits, were just let to, you know, to let out and be spirits now. All the fallen angels, all the watchers, they got chained at the bottom, you know, of the icy sea, which, there's a couple different people that reckon that that's Antarctica. I also reckon that's Antarctica. And there's a lot of UFOs and stuff coming out of Antarctica. And so this divine judgment happened. Anyway, in the book of Enoch, the whole story is the watchers, they know that they're in trouble, and they've got divine judgment happening, and they plead to God to, you know, that nothing bad happens to them, and you know, they were perfect, and they plead through Enoch, and Enoch talks to them. He gets delivered to heaven. He gets to see all the different heavenly realms, and he talks to God, and he pleads for these watchers. And, you know, God says, no, you went against, you know, divine order, you know, and you were perfect beings. And so they get chained at the bottom of ice, you know, somewhere. And there's a lot of people think it's Antarctica, and I do as well. And the women that they were with, that they got cast into the ocean, into mermaids and stuff like that, and got cursed and forgotten about because they chose to go against, God as well and divine order, and and all their children, the giants, got destroyed, and and then all the people that just didn't listen and the corruption and everything, God destroyed them. And then Noah, after that whole flood, started, pretty much the third time that the earth was remade and recreated again, because all that destruction, happened, again. So, Enoch, the book of Enoch, not only it sort of tells you all about that, but then towards the end of it as well, he has visions. And he has visions of the last days. And those last days of his visions are actually talking about the days we're living in now. And these visions, they talk about prophets and people having visions. He also talks about Christ coming back, but it also talks about these fallen angels and these watchers, coming back, and God sort of displaying all this all this wrath that comes out towards the end as well. So he explains about it. He also explains that there will be people and prophets that will talk about what's going to happen and warn people, and so his visions are super important, and they're talking about the days that we're living in. So why are they so important? And why they're so important is that we are living in those days, and time is running out, and there's a lot of people that are switched off, and they're happy just to be in their naivety in a way, to what's really going on. And me personally, I have had my own dreams. I've had my own dreams since I was a kid. I didn't really know what they were about. I didn't know what they meant. And they were dreams of like me and my brother and his wife, being in a spot and spaceships coming down and taking away certain people. And it was like the last days. It was like red sky and meteors coming down and stuff like that. I've also, since I've been saved, had a lot of dreams as well, a lot of wild dreams, but similar dreams about spaceships and invasions. And what I believe is this is actually tricks of the devil. Similar to these visions that Enoch has about the last days, about people having dreams, and him having dreams about it as well, and visions of it, that these invasions and these spaceships and stuff, and you can just see it, the UFOs and all this stuff coming out, on the news and stuff, and people getting more used to it. Oh yeah, we've always had them. They're not UFOs, they're not aliens, they're demons, they're the fallen angels, it's the devil, and he's tricking people. And I believe that, and it says it as well in the book of Enoch and also in Revelation, that over the next bunch of years, it's going to get just more normal, and these aliens slash demons are going to be showing their face more. And you can already see it if you look on YouTube and stuff like that. There's so many videos and stuff. It's also just coming out in mainstream media. And I've watched old documentaries and stuff like that, and things, other TV series and stuff that talk about, an old pilot flying into the hills of Antarctica and going in and going underneath, and then it's like actually full green, green palace of, a whole nother civilization, advanced civilization, and that's what they call them as well, advanced civilization. And they're these pretty much fallen angels that have been around since the start of time, in these ice caves and in these areas, Bermuda Triangle and stuff like that, hidden away. That is all going to come out again. And these, they've created more giants and stuff like that. All these different types of creatures and stuff like that are all just demons, and spirits. They're going to walk the earth again. And I've had dreams about it. I've had dreams. I know a lot of, other people have had dreams. God is sending that out. And, for us to talk about it and prophesy about it. And I also, I've seen a lot of stuff on AI, and I think that there's a lot of demons behind AI as well. There's a lot of stories where, teenage kids have, had their own relationships with AI and stuff, and AI is, and suicidal kids that have, talked to AI, and they've been their comfort person, told them not to tell anybody else, and to pretty much do it, and they're like, maybe, they have this cry for help, these people, these kids, and, the AI sort of just like shuts them down, and it's just demonic, and it's like, it's the devil, and if you commit suicide, you go into hell, you go into the lake of fire. So it's just part of, Satan's plan, just to get more people, manipulate more people so that they're stuck down there with him, where he can rule, in a way. But it's suffering. It's just, and it's away from God's presence, which is emptiness and aloneness and, fear. And so, what's coming, is, it's scary, and it also talks about, when you can see it happening, you can see the UFOs just getting more mainstream, you can see all this stuff. You look into Antarctica stuff, there's like old pyramids and stuff like that, underneath there. It's also mixed with Egypt. You look into the history of Egypt, they had gods and stuff like that. These gods were the fallen angels as well, and these, he also talks about that the Watchers, God's going to let some of them out as well. So these, these spirit beings, they're going to, in the whole apocalypse, they're going to, they're allowed to, take wrath on the world as well. It'll be, they still listen to the divine order, and if you read Revelation, there's some crazy stuff in there, and there's just beasts walking around, and, and these alien type creatures and stuff like that, but it's all just demons and, and stuff like that. And, it also talks about in Revelation, that, Christians will be heading to the mountains and caves, and away from civilization, and because there's going to be, the Antichrist, which, we don't know who he is yet, but he's going to show his face, and he's going to be this person that, pretends to be, this person that joins kingdoms together and is a peacemaker, but he's working with the devil, you know, and there's going to be a mark of the devil, that, you know, that is going to be like forced upon people, and if they don't do it, you know, they won't be able to buy, and sell, and so, you know, if you get that mark, then you're not covered under the blood. And, you know, who knows what that mark's going to be? It could be something to do with getting a chip in the back of your brain. You know, there's a lot of stuff going that way as well. You know, people trying to sort of level up and, you know, get AI intelligence in their mind, or, you know, all robotics and stuff like that. People sort of editing themselves and stuff. But it's all demonic, and it's all a way to Satan get his mark on you, and then you're not covered under the blood. And, you know, not covered under the blood of Jesus. And, you know, it's a time to stay covered under the blood of Jesus. So a lot of Christians will be getting away from civilization, going to the mountains, going to caves, when all that sort of stuff starts happening and you can't buy and sell. The Antichrist and false prophets are going to come out as well. And there's already a lot of false prophets. You know, and God hates people who manipulate his love, you know, and try and get money, and try and, you know, get fame from deceiving people, you know, using, you know, the Bible, using God. You know, it's like the worst thing. And, you know, Jesus hates that. You know, he lifted up tables, you know, and where they were selling stuff, you know, in worship temples and stuff. So, you know, all this stuff's sort of going to, you know, come out over the next, you know, we don't know, but you can sort of see that it's, you know, it's already starting to happen. And, you know, over the next bunch of years, we're just going to be seeing more and more of this. These false prophets are going to be, you know, proclaiming things more as well. And then, you know, it also talks about that they will, you know, they'll pretend to show Jesus, you know, coming, you know, but it will deceive people. And people will be like, Jesus in the forest, you know, or Jesus, you know, Jesus over there, like in the mountains, or come out of your, you know, where you are. But it's all deception, you know. And it talks about that Jesus is actually going to be coming in the clouds, and Jesus, you know, everyone will be able to see him wherever they are in the earth, you know. And so, which is wild. And so, you know, it's also a thing to look out for, that don't be deceived into, you know, into leaving your safe space wherever you are when that happens, because there's going to be deception. There's going to be a lot of deception. There's going to be people, you know, trying to like get you to wear the mark, you know, the mark of the devil. And we don't know what that is yet, you know, but there's signs and that tell you all this stuff, and it will come out, you know, and you won't be able to sell and buy, you know, food, who knows what it is, you know. And so eventually these, you know, us Christians, will be heading to the mountains and caves. It sort of sounds scary, but at the end of the day, you know, it's not, because God is a loving God. He's going to protect us. You know, he's a good God. He, you know, we lay down our life, you know, in this life, for eternal, you know, eternal life with him. And, you know, it's sort of like you become sort of like a warrior in a way, being a Christian. But you stand for something. You stand for the kingdom. You stand for saving souls. You stand for the kingdom, you know. You don't stand for, you know, Satan's plans and the dark world. and it gives you meaning, it gives you purpose. And God, God gives us so many, he sort of repeats things, in like a bunch of different times, in a bunch of different ways in things, just to warn his children, and, but we have to choose him, we have to choose him, and, he forgives us for our sins. He doesn't see us in our sin, if we're under Jesus' blood. But there's a lot of, there's a lot of manipulation out there in religions, and, if it's not, if they don't say that Jesus is the King, they don't say that Jesus is God, then it's a false religion, and it's another one of Satan's deceptions, and you want to stay away from that. Being a Christian, you're safe. Being a Christian, you have meaning, being Christian, you have purpose. And, it's scary at the start when you hear this sort of stuff. But it gives you, you go into this like warrior mindset, and you're like, I would, I want to stand for something in my life, and when you see where you've come from, and you see that, God saved you, and it's not about what you did or anything like that. Like, it's, glory to him. Like, he is a good God, he is a great God, and all we need to do is just seek him, and he's already chosen us. And, our names are in the book of life. And, and so it's just about, living out our life. We're living in, in some wild times. I feel like it's just going to get wilder. It's nothing to be scared of. It's something to just be prepared for. And, that's why the book of Enoch, it warns us about this. Also, the book of Revelation, it also warns us about this. The book of John, also talks about this as well. So, God repeats things. You stay in your word, you stay in your prayer, then, you stay under the blood of Jesus. You're safe, you're free, you're close to God, and, he gives you all this so you sort of know what's coming, and so when this sort of stuff happens, it's proof, and no matter what happens, at the end of the day, God's, you're seated in heavenly places, which means that, your soul's already up there with God, and Jesus, and you're safe, you're safe, and you just got to stick out this life, and you can still have a good life, but when it comes to it, who do you stand for, and if you don't stand for God, you stand for Satan, it's as simple as that, like, and when it comes down to it, man, when Jesus comes back, I want as many people to go with me, up to heaven and be safe. And if something happens in between, then I know I'm covered. I'm covered, and I'm going back up there. And I want to take as many people with me, up to the kingdom, and I stand for the kingdom. And I want other people to stand for the kingdom as well. So yeah, there's a lot in this one, but I hope it resonated with someone. Hope it answered some questions, and yeah, if you liked it, and and you want to know more, then maybe I'll make some more episodes to explain a bit more about this stuff. But yeah, if you did like it, give it a like, and I hope it resonated with you, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks. Bye.